Oh, hello. My name is Mara, and welcome to Books Like Whoa. Today we're doing the second video in what will be a trilogy of videos about Murder on the Orient Express by Agatha Christie. And the reason I'm doing these videos is because very soon there is going to be a major motion picture made of Murder on the Orient Express starring, I believe, Kenneth Branagh, however you say his name, and a whole bunch of other very well-known actors, and I definitely will be seeing that, and I will be doing a review for you guys here, so that'll be the third video. But before we get to that one, a lot of people are not aware that there is already a fantastic movie adaptation of Murder on the Orient Express that was released in the 70s, which stars, I believe, Albert Brooks as Poirot in a fantastic portrayal. Ingrid Bergman is in this movie, Sean Connery, God, like everybody and their mom is in this movie basically, and it's a really, really good adaptation. So before I see the new adaptation, I wanted to do an installment of book or movie for Murder on the Orient Express, the book, versus Murder on the Orient Express, the original adaptation. And this is a situation in which I think both of these particular pieces of work are excellent. I think that they are superlative in their given mediums and genres, so there's not really a lot of cons happening here. This will mostly be me just sort of comparing pros. So let's just start with the book. Now, I did a review, my first video in this series was a review of Murder on the Orient Express as a part of my Project Poirot, which I will link somewhere up here in the cards as well as in the description box. That's where you can get my full thoughts on Murder on the Orient Express as a book. But if I was going to sum that up, basically what I would say is I think that this is probably the best novel that Christie ever wrote. Now we'll see if my opinion changes as Project Poirot rolls along, but for now I would say that this is probably the best novel she ever wrote, and I think she's essentially probably the best mystery novelist ever. So I guess by default, I would essentially say I think that this is probably the best mystery ever written. The characters are interesting, it's very well paced, she picks a very smart setting that plays to her strengths as a writer, which is more on psychology and sort of picking through people's lives as opposed to being very forensic or something like that. It's just a great book. It's very enjoyable. I think if you enjoy mysteries, this is absolutely something you should try to read. Now, I'm not saying 100% of people are going to love this or say that this is the best mystery they ever read, but I think that this is something, the way that I would essentially say that if you like romance novels, for example, if you've not read Pride and Prejudice, you should at least try to read it because it's a classic and it is an innovator in that genre. Like, it is a part of the history of that genre, and I feel very similarly about this book. Even if you don't end up liking it, I think that this is worth your time reading if you are somebody who enjoys reading mysteries. Like I said, I just think this is basically Agatha Christie kind of at the height of her powers. She's got a large cast that she is managing well. She's created a bunch of very memorable characters. She's created a crime that is not easily solvable. While this is technically a fair mystery, like you could sort of figure it out, and I want to say that I kind of hinted in my mind at what the answer or the solution to this was about 50 to 60% of the way through. I don't think that it's not easily solvable because it's sort of improbable, but I think that it's a very interesting book, and I basically would recommend this to pretty much anybody who reads mysteries. That's the bottom line. I love this book. I think it's fantastic. Now, when we come to the movie version of this book, the original adaptation, it is also one that I recommend wholeheartedly to many, many people, and I would argue that it is, at least from what I've seen, the best mystery, like murder mystery movie that I have ever seen, because first of all, it's picked its source material very well, right? Like, I mean, I clearly think this is a fantastic book, so it's working off very good source material. But beyond that, the way it's shot is beautiful. The costumes are gorgeous. The setting, in terms of like recreating the luxness of the Orient Express, the train, is beautiful. And it's a very atmospheric and evocative movie because it was made in the 70s about the 30s. And if you follow kind of like influences of fashion, you would know that the 70s actually was kind of resurgence fashion-wise of a lot of things that were happening from the 30s, right? Like women are wearing kind of like higher waisted pants with like kind of big legs. There's a lot of volume. The haircuts in some ways are kind of similar in terms of lots of like waves and bobs, and there's a lot of like 30s influence on the 70s in general. So I think in terms of capturing the aesthetic, it was a particularly like well-placed moment for them to do that well, because the culture in general was very inspired by the 30s at that particular moment. So like all the visuals in this movie are just beautiful is basically what I'm trying to get at. So I think that is something in terms of having a medium that is visual, they do a fantastic job of making this book, which is very plot driven, right? Like it's very much about plot and not necessarily the setting so much. I think they do a great job of making the setting and the sort of atmosphere of the movie, because it is visual, they justify why it's a movie, basically, right? Like, to me, part of what an adaptation has to do is justify, like, why do we need a visual of this rather than just the written version? And I think they do a very nice job of that. Then when we come to acting, you have got so many actors at the height of their powers in this movie, and the main performance by the person who plays Hercule Poirot, which again, I believe is Albert Brooke, is fantastic. Like, he's probably the best Poirot. He's definitely the best movie Poirot. I think David Suchet, it's hard to beat him as just any, you know, acting version of a Poirot. I think he is sort of like the iconic one. But in terms of the movies that have been made to date, he is clearly the winner here. I believe he was nominated for an Academy Award for this. It's just a great performance, and it's a movie filled with great performances. Because there's not a lot of big roles, it's essentially a bunch of great film actors in character parts, which is something that you see more in a play. And I actually watched a little documentary that was on my DVD kind of talking about the filming of this, and it's interesting because I think they essentially approached filming it almost like they would a play in terms of how they rehearsed it, how they sort of blocked a lot of things. And really what this is there are a lot of recognizable movie names in this movie, but there's also a lot of like seasoned, well-respected theater people in this movie, and I think that was a really smart choice. The entire approach feels very much like theatrical, like in the theater, and I think that serves the material very well, because it's sort of it's a claustrophobic setting, right? Like you're on this train the way that in the theater you're on this stage. So I think that was a really smart way for them to approach it, and I think it really, really works in terms of giving the actors an opportunity to sort of play the parts a certain way. And I think pretty much everyone does that excellently. And then finally, the pacing. So the pacing in the book is very like, it keeps things moving. And in a movie, I think if they paced it exactly the way it is in the book, it might have felt a little repetitive and a little bit kind of rote after a while. Like, it works in the book, but I don't know that it would work that well in the movie. And I think that they did a really nice job, again, because it's sort of like a claustrophobic setting. They do a really nice job of sort of moving around the train and mixing things up and slightly varying the order in which Poirot is interrogating people. I think that they do that nicely. I think they make appropriate changes or sort of modifications to make what the overall feeling of the book is work for a movie. And yeah, I think in summary, that's probably how I would describe this original adaptation, is that I think they really honed in very nicely on what works in the book and translated it beautifully to film of how to make that work for film. And to me, just like philosophically here for a moment, for me, an adaptation is successful when the people who make it have done exactly that. They found a way to make what's great about the book work for a movie. That, and I also want them to have kind of a point of view, right? Because it is an adaptation. That means essentially what it is an interpretation. So one movie, for example, that I think does this really well is the third and last two movies of the Harry Potter franchise, because those are they have a point of view, right? Like, they have come to the source material and they have like a specific vision of, or sort of lens of how they're interpreting it. For instance, the first part of the Deathly Hallows movies, the first one, to me very clearly reads as sort of like a World War II type movie where everybody's kind of like filled with dread and like it almost feels like you're hiding from the Nazis a lot in that movie. And I think that that is exactly what you should do in a movie adaptation. You should bring your own interpretation to things. Another example is the Lord of the Rings movies. When Peter Jackson read those books, he clearly saw the lens he was bringing was epic war film. So it is a fantasy movie still, but all of the sort of like vocabulary and tone of that is really like an epic war movie. And I think that that really works for those books. Now, he tried to take that same lens and apply it to The Hobbit, and I don't think it works for The Hobbit because The Hobbit is like whimsical and I don't think it was as successful. But anyway, all that to say, philosophically, what I want them to do is to take what works in the book and figure out a great way to put that on film and to have their own point of view. And I think that this adaptation does both of those things because, again, I do think that they find ways to take what's awesome about the book. They translate that visually very nicely, and also in the script in terms of how they break things up. I think they do a good job of preserving the spirit of the book in a way that works for the movie. And then secondly, I think sort of the point of view that they bring to this particular adaptation is this idea of atmosphere and glamour. And I think that that's not something that necessarily comes across in the book, but is a completely valid reading, and I think supports what's happening in the book very, very nicely. So I'm pretty much raving about both of these, but which would I pick if I had to, the book or the movie? Well, I'm gonna have to say the book because I think that this is just essentially the best of its genre, so how can I say otherwise? That being said, I would also say that the movie is the best murder mystery type movie I've ever seen, but I just don't think that that's a big enough genre to really be as momentous of an achievement. That being said, I think that it is a fantastic movie. I would recommend both. If I was picking one to recommend over the other, I would pick the book over the movie in this case, but I would wholeheartedly recommend the movie, and I will be, essentially in my third video, I'm going to compare the two movie adaptations and kind of say which of those I think is better. So look for that, I guess, in early November, because I think that the movie comes out on the 10th of November-ish, something like that. So if you have seen this movie and or read this book, let me know your thoughts if you agree or disagree with me. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, follow me on the social medias if you are so inclined. I have all that information listed in the description box. And yeah, I think that's gonna do it. I hope you're having a fantastic day, and I will talk to you soon. Bye!